Hello everybody, I'm Pletl Philipp. I'm a product designer turned product manager, and I'm deeply interested in philosophy, economy, and also society and culture. And in today's video, I want to talk about the misconception that people from the West have about China. Maybe you have noticed how in the West, China is almost always spoken about in the same way. It's either a rising adversary, a surveillance state that is oppressing their citizens, or even a faceless machine of state-led capitalism. From policy think tanks to late-night talk shows and also online, China is almost never treated as neutral, let alone even positive. It's flattened into a caricature of a global enemy. It is a problem that needs to be contained, a rival that we have to outcompete, or a riddle that we can't decode. But there's a truth behind of that. Beneath all that anxiety is a deeper failure. It's the way that we look at China. If we want to understand China, we also have to look at it in its own terms. So last year I traveled China several times. I have been to Shanghai, Beijing, and Dali. These are three very different cities, and each have a different kind of layer or reality about the China of today. And all of these cities are shattering the stereotypes that we have about China in the West. What I have encountered on my travels was, of course, not a utopia, but it was also not the Orwellian nightmare of a surveillance state that we might expect in the West. It was something far more interesting and disorientating. It is a state and a society that is governed by a completely different set of assumptions and rules. And if we want to understand China, not through headlines, but through the reality, we need to start by looking at its history, at the values of the Chinese society, and how all of this is lived in the present. China isn't a modern state like France, Germany, or various others. It is a civilization state. China existed in some way for thousands of years, and their legitimacy in China didn't come from elections or voting, it came from the stability that the government could give to the citizens. The dynasties of China rose and fell on their ability to deliver the order, the social harmony, and to manage the complexity at scale. We have to keep in mind that China is insanely big, so having a good governance over all of these provinces is actually pretty difficult. Where we in the West are elevating the competition and the individualism and freedom, China is more privileging the hierarchy, the collective harmony, and the pragmatism. And this is the reason why so many Western critics are missing the mark. We think that China doesn't have any elections, and we think that's a bad thing. But this is the framework of legitimacy in our world, but not in China. In China, the state is earning respect, not because we vote for them, but because they function. It is because the infrastructure just works. The civic safety is very high. The technological and economic progress is unbelievable, and there is a very big national pride with a long-term sense of purpose to give the Chinese citizens. So this all isn't ideology, as also many people in the West believe. It's the DNA of the civilization that has been negotiating with chaos and order for many millennia. This is the history of China, and it's really crucial to understand if we want to know why China is the way that it is today. Now that we have covered the history, I want to move on to my travels and explain the real China in terms of what I have experienced being in China. The first city that I have visited was Shanghai. And Shanghai is really something completely else than what we are used to in Europe. It is not chaos, it's coordinated. They have a very high density. It's so dense we can't really understand it if we haven't been there. But everything there works astonishingly smooth. The trains arrive at seconds. The digital payments connect every service very smoothly. And the city feels like one giant, seamless interface that all the citizens can use at the same time without any problems. But there has been one thing that struck me the most, and it's the safety. At midnight, I walked alone through train stations or neighborhoods. I was buying some food and eating on the go, and there was no fear, no graffiti, no trash, no shouting, no alcoholic people, nothing. It was just quiet and peaceful. And that is something that I think we don't know anymore in Europe. The first night I spent there, it was actually shocking to me. It felt like an experience that I never had in my life. My whole life I have never been in a city at night feeling safe, feeling peaceful, and also kind of slow and happy, not alerted where maybe danger is, not thinking I should go home or I should go back to the hotel. It was just peaceful. Of course, the surveillance exists. Of course, there are cameras everywhere. But this is the reason why everyone in China can be safe at midnight and also at day, of course. And because of this surveillance, something else can exist. And this is the civic trust. People can coexist in a big city like Shanghai without fear or without having to be alerted. And all of this is forcing a very difficult question. What good is our European freedom if our cities are collapsing into dysfunction and danger? What good is a democracy if the public life is governed by fear? And Shanghai is challenging all of these assumptions. It kind of asks what freedom can emerge from order and surveillance, and what kind of trust is emerging from such a system. And I think these are very crucial questions that we should ask in politics in Europe. If we move on, then my next stop was in Dali. It is a very small natural city nestled in the Yunnan province, and it's unbelievably beautiful, and I would recommend to everyone to visit Dali. Dali is slower, softer, and completely different to a big city like Shanghai. I have met painters, musicians, coffee shop owners, and all of these people were choosing the quiet life over recognition and fame in a big city. It was beauty over ambition. And all of this didn't feel like a rebellion. It was a withdrawal of the life, of the stressful city life. It is a kind of resistance that is telling us we don't need to fight the system. We simply live outside of it in our own peaceful world. And this city reminded me of Taoist philosophy, which is a traditional Chinese philosophy. And the values of these thoughts are lying in the nature and the flow of the world. And I think that is very fitting to describe Dali. So ironically, what the people in the West, what we think are retreats and wellness spas, these are not a holiday that they take. For them, it is everyday life. And that too is China. It's not an oppressive society that needs to work every day. It's not people that cannot speak out. These people can live in harmony and peace, not thinking about politics. They're not fighting for politics. They're not going on the street, but they are silently retreating from it. And I think that's also very interesting and shows that while we in Europe are loudly fighting for our rights, in China, you're silently retreating to fight for your rights. And I think you need to keep that in mind if you look at China and say there is no freedom, because it's a different kind of freedom. And last but not least, I have been in Beijing just 1 month ago, I think. And Beijing was, again, a little bit different. Also different to the other big city, Shanghai. Beijing felt much more historic and had more political symbolism. I have been to Tiananmen Square, I have been to the Forbidden City, and it is an unbelievably large space that is conveying continuity. And it feels like this is our politics and it will always be like that. If you are going to Tiananmen Square in person, it feels just like you need to respect the politic. It is a very heavy feeling that you have. But beneath this weight, this political weight of the city, beneath all this political history, are also students, banking people, young professionals, with an optimism, with a motivation. They know, of course, that censorship exists, but they see it as a trade-off, not like a personal tragedy. They don't ask, why don't we have elections? They want to know if this system can deliver safety, stability, and a better life. And this is one main thing that the Western mind fails to comprehend. We think the legitimacy comes only through elections and voting, but in Beijing, it is performance-based. The state governs strongly, but it also listens, adapts, and experiments. For many Chinese citizens, authority and the hierarchy isn't oppressing, it's more like protection, because chaos is not an abstract idea. It is their history and a memory that is alive. So they're happy if the politic can give them the safety and protection. And now we need to move on to a topic that we need to talk about if we talk about China. It is the economy. And we in the West, we can't ignore the economy of China. China has built at a velocity that the world has never seen before. 800 million people were lifted off poverty. And the high-speed rails, all the infrastructure makes Europe or also America feel very, very slow. The megacities like Shenzhen and Chongqing are rising in decades, from small fishing hubs to global economic hubs. But of course, we also need to look at the other side and need to think about if this is sustainable. We have seen real estate crackdowns quite recently. We have seen a lot of debt at local levels and a demographic decline, which we also have everywhere in our world. There is a very big youth unemployment too. So all of this miracle of the Chinese economy is currently under a lot of pressure. But there's also something unique, that maybe all of this is not that heavy or that problematic, because the Chinese politics is also thinking in decades, maybe 5, 10, 30-year plans. So they have very cohesive strategies that can outlast the political cycles. Of course, that doesn't guarantee success, but it gives them an edge. The alignment of resources with the long-term purpose, which I think also often lacks in Europe. And here we are coming to a very uncomfortable truth. China hasn't forgotten the basics of economic growth and of politics and society. They have safe streets, efficient infrastructure, and a very strong sense of direction that everyone is working towards. Meanwhile, in the Western cities is decay, political fragmentation, and a discourse of collapses into our performance. We mistake the disorder for freedom. So what if control, if we do it competently, produces more lived freedom than our dysfunctional liberty ever could? What if China's system, while it is flawed, of course, delivers results that people actually trust and that people actually prefer? I didn't leave China as a convert. I left kind of shaken, or I woke up, not by the propaganda, even though I didn't see any propaganda actually, but by the gap between what I'd been told to in the West and what I really saw in China. Of course, China is not perfect, but it works in many ways that we don't want to admit or that we maybe don't even see. And if we in the West want to stay relevant, we must stop waiting for China to collapse and start fixing itself into our Western kind of imagination. The real enemy isn't China, and it isn't any other country. It's our own motivation, our own thinking. So we need to focus, build, and rethink, to adapt, and to be able to be competitive in the global world. This is my perspective on China. I have also written an article that this video is based on that you can also read about in my website. And I hope you found this perspective valuable. And I hope you consider subscribing for more future content like this. I want to share more essays like this on philosophy, economics, and all the systems that shape our world. Because if we want to understand the 21st century, we cannot afford to keep looking through the wrong lens. Thank you for watching.